It happened in the early hours of October 3rd, 1851, in a quiet New England town called Dunwich Cove. The wind that night came from the sea, heavy with brine and silence. Upstairs, in a small wooden bedroom above a cobbler's shop, 9-year-old Eleanor Whitlock lay motionless on the floor. Her parents claimed the door to her room was stuck shut, though no lock was ever found. By the time they broke it down, she was already gone, pale, stiff, her eyes wide open and fixed on the ceiling. Her skin was cold, her limbs twisted unnaturally inward, as though bracing against something unspeakable. But it was what lay beneath her skin that terrified the town doctor. Eleanor's blood had turned to salt, grainy, coarse. Pure white crystals filled her arteries where red once flowed. There was no explanation, no wound, no fever, no sign of struggle. By morning the family was in hiding. By nightfall the body was burned, and within the month, all public records of Eleanor Whitlock had vanished. What really happened in that locked room? This is the case that even the church tried to bury, and science still cannot explain. Before we descend any deeper into Eleanor's case, I ask only this. If stories like these speak to something hidden in your memory, if you've ever walked into a room and felt that it remembered more than you do, then consider subscribing to this channel. Here we exhume the forgotten, the sealed and the whispered stories that history tried to erase, but time refused to forgive. Leave a comment if you've heard of similar cases, or if Eleanor's story feels familiar in ways it shouldn't. And now, let's return to the house on Widow's Hollow Road, where the shutters never opened, and the bedroom door never closed quite right again. In the mid-19th century, the town of Dunwich Cove, Rhode Island, barely existed on most maps. Tucked between two crumbling cliffs and the Atlantic's jagged edge, Dunwich was a community of no more than 300 souls, a place where windows were shuttered by dusk and prayers were whispered in dead languages, not out of reverence, but out of fear, the kind of fear that seeps into the mortar of a place until even the birds fly differently above it. By 1851, Dunwich had no proper roads leading in or out, just a single rail line long since abandoned, and a ferry that docked 3 times a year when the tides allowed. The people were private, pale and bound to superstition. Church was held on Thursdays. Mirrors were covered on Sundays. Children were baptized twice, once by water, once by salt. And it is here in this forgotten harbor that the Whitlock family made their home. Thomas Whitlock was a cordwainer, a shoemaker by trade, who had inherited his father's business and a strange little 2-story shop near the edge of the wharf. His wife, Margaret, rarely spoke in public. The locals said she had mainland blood, though no one knew from where. The couple had no children for 9 years of marriage, until Eleanor was born on the coldest day of 1842 during what the townsfolk called the Gray Winter, when even the snow came down in ash-colored flurries. Eleanor was unlike other children in Dunwich. She rarely spoke, and when she did, it was in soft riddles, things she couldn't have known, things the older townspeople whispered about only when drunk or dying. At age 6, she told the minister his wife would drown in the mill pond. 2 days later she did. At 7, she asked her teacher, "What does the devil smell like when he's wet?" No one ever forgot that question, especially not the teacher, who left town that same week and never returned. Eleanor was often seen standing in the attic window of the Whitlock home, looking not at the town but out toward the sea. Her hair grew unnaturally fat, her skin bruised from sunlight. Her eyes were gray, not the soft blue-gray of most New Englanders, but a flat, pale gray, like driftwood. Neighbors said the Whitlocks kept to themselves. The local butcher claimed Margaret never bought meat. Others said Thomas buried something in the yard every Sunday, small bundles wrapped in fabric, always tied with black thread. By the time Eleanor was 8, she had stopped going outside entirely. Then came the harvest tide of 1851, an unseasonably violent storm that ripped half the shingles off the Whitlock roof and flooded the town's cemetery. Dozens of graves were uprooted, coffins floated into the marsh, and, for 3 nights the bell of the old chapel rang, despite having no rope and no bell ringer. On the 4th morning, Eleanor was found dead, not outside, not in the flood, but locked in her room, her skin cold, her body rigid, her blood turned to salt. The Whitlocks refused an autopsy. The priest refused to bury her. Instead, the child was burned at dusk, her ashes mixed with lye and dumped into the sea. No headstone, no procession, just the lingering smell of salt and camphor that clung to Widow's Hollow Road for weeks after. But the story didn't begin with Eleanor's death. It began with the land. You see, the Whitlock property was built over what once stood as the foundation of an older chapel, one that was supposedly raised in the late 1700s during the clerical purge of Rhode Island. That chapel, according to suppressed church records, had been deemed unholy, not for what was preached inside it but for what was buried beneath it. A salt pit, a ritual site, something old. And when the Whitlocks built their home, they used reclaimed wood from the original church structure, timber pulled from the sea caves nearby, and stone from the sunken chapel's altar, which still bore faded carvings of unknown script. Some say the family didn't know, others believe they did. The final 7 days of Eleanor Whitlock's life were remembered not by her parents, but by the people who had no choice but to watch. In a town like Dunwich Cove, secrets are rarely kept. They simply linger in the cracks of old stone, in letters never mailed, in windows that should have been shuttered but weren't. It began with a noise. Night 1, October 1st, 1851. At precisely 1:13 a.m., neighbors described hearing what sounded like wet parchment being torn over and over, coming from the direction of the Whitlock house. The town's night watchman, Abraham Pitts, noted the sound in his weather journal, writing strange tearing, not wind, no visible source from Widow's Hollow. The family gave no explanation. Night 2, October 2nd, Eleanor did not come down for supper. A nearby shopkeeper, Emmett Dawes, claimed he saw Margaret Whitlock digging in the garden that morning, not planting, but removing something wrapped in linen. That same evening, a fog rolled in from the sea, not unusual for October, except this fog never touched the docks. It lingered solely around the Whitlock home, clinging to its frame like it had roots in the wood. Inside the house, Margaret was heard speaking, in a low rhythmic voice, despite no one else being in the room. A passing fisherman claimed he heard her repeating the same word, Salim, 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 a word not found in any local dialect. Night 3, October 3rd, 12:41 a.m. The screaming began, but not from Eleanor, from Thomas. A deep, animal scream, the kind that doesn't echo right, the kind that turns the blood in your spine. Witnesses said it was cut off mid-breath. No whimper, no second cry, just a full stop, then silence. By sunrise, Eleanor was found curled on her bedroom floor. The door had jammed from the inside, and it took Thomas nearly 15 minutes to break through. What he saw would end the family and change the town. Eleanor's body was untouched by visible injury, but her skin had taken on a strange sheen, almost reflective. Her lips were cracked open, Her gums exposed and white granules clung to the sides of her mouth. Her eyes were fixed upward, pupils dilated, irises colorless. One hand stretched toward the window, the other clenched around something invisible. It was only after the doctor attempted to draw blood that they discovered the truth. Her veins were packed with salt, pure, crystallized, still warm. Daylight that followed, the doctor, Samuel Grimm, one of the only trained physicians in Kent County, requested the body be sent to the next township for study. Margaret refused. She struck him with a candle holder and threatened to burn the house down with Eleanor still inside if he didn't leave. 2 hours later, the smell of smoke drifted into the square. The body had already been burned. The townspeople gathered but kept their distance. Those who did get close, including young Eli Mortimer, the baker's apprentice, reported that the fire burned blue, not orange, and no one could remember where the wood came from. It hadn't been chopped, it was already arranged in a perfect triangle in the center of the Whitlock yard. The days after the Whitlocks stopped opening their doors, Margaret was seen standing in the attic window at all hours. Thomas was never seen again. Some say he left town on foot. Others believe he hanged himself in the cellar. 4 days later, a group of local boys, curious and foolish, crept onto the property. They never went inside. They didn't have to. In the dirt surrounding the foundation, they found tiny circles etched into the soil, each no wider than a saucer, burned into the earth. In the center of each, a dead bird, salt crusted around their beaks. They told no one, but one of the boys, Charles Wenton, confessed the truth on his deathbed in 8. His written statement reads, "There were 33 of them, the circles, all around the house, and they hummed. I swear they hummed. I could feel it in my teeth, like something waking up." A letter from the past. Months later, a letter surfaced from Reverend Alpheus Null, dated October 12, 1851, 9 days after Eleanor's death. It was addressed to a bishop in Providence, and never sent. The letter was discovered tucked into a hymnal during the restoration of the Dunwich Chapel in 19. It reads, "I fear I have failed. The Whitlock girl, Eleanor, she was not simply ill, she was chosen, or perhaps exchanged. Her blood, the salt, this is not disease, this is return. The ground remembers, the sea reclaims. We should never have rebuilt upon that chapel's foundation. It was buried for a reason." The bishop's response, if there was one, is lost. Margaret's disappearance. In December of that same year, Margaret Whitlock vanished, her home abandoned, her shop boarded shut, no sale recorded, no will filed, only a smear of ash on the attic windowsill and 2 small salt crystals found beside Eleanor's old crib. The town of Dunwich Cove, as quiet as it had always been, simply went on, but the story never stopped spreading. The case of Eleanor Whitlock was never formally investigated. There was no coroner's inquest, no physician signed a death certificate, and the records that should exist, birth, baptism, school, death, are either lost or deliberately erased. And yet, evidence still exists, not in the ledgers of men, but in the lingering whispers of Dunwich Cove. A handful of artifacts and testimonies passed down through blood and shame. The first is the salt itself. In 1893, during the demolition of the Whitlock shop, workers uncovered a sealed vial beneath a floorboard, tested by apothecary Nathaniel Crick, who claimed the salt inside did not dissolve in water or blacken under flame, but released a metallic vapor that constricted the lungs. Crick died 3 months later of lung collapse. The vial vanished. In 1901, traveling surveyors Harold and Gideon Stamps visited the ruins and recorded handprint glyphs made of salt fused into attic wood. Photographs failed. Gideon disappeared. Harold was institutionalized. repeating the door doesn't open for the living. A school register from 1850 holds Eleanor's only known handwriting. Elegant, Gothic, shimmering like fish scales. Beatrice Marchwood, a local historian, noted the ink could not be photocopied. In Dr. Samuel Grimm's medical ledger, pages between September 30 and October 4, 1851, are missing. The only remaining note says, "Cannot classify it. Cellular structure breaking. Not dead, but undone." Beneath it, in different handwriting, the marrow rang. In 1997, paranormal researcher Alan Tork took soil samples from beneath the former Whitlock house. One contained salt with a crystalline lattice, unknown to science. When played recordings of children's voices, it liquefied briefly, then reformed. Tork's grant was revoked. She vanished. In 1903, during chapel restoration, a hymnal was found. Its final page contained a handwritten piece, titled Canticle of the Salted Tongue. In reverse clef, lyrics read, "Let the sea drink the child. Let the sky dry her eyes. Let the bone learn the song of the womb, and salt her blood until morning comes." The ink fades in light, glows blue in darkness. No melody matches the notation. A final artifact came in the form of a letter written by midwife Ruth Elkins in 1851, discovered in 1981. She described Eleanor's birth. The child arrived too quickly, did not cry, gripped her hand until it bled, and smiled in a way that was not innocent. Elkins wrote, "This one doesn't belong to them. This one was sent." She fled Dunwich Cove that year. Taken together, a pattern emerges. Eleanor was different from birth. Physically, spiritually, the land beneath the Whitlock home was corrupted. Once sacred, perhaps cursed. Salt recurs in every form. Veins, rituals, glyphs, hymns, records blacken, ink vanishes, researchers disappear. Most disturbingly, everything, the blood, the hymn, the salt, responded to sound, which means Eleanor may not have died at all. She may have converted. No one heard the bell for nearly 2 decades. After Eleanor Whitlock's death and the burning of the Whitlock home, Dunwich Cove settled into a quiet kind of denial. The townspeople stopped mentioning the Whitlocks entirely. Parents refused to answer questions about Eleanor. Children were forbidden to play near the remains of Widow's Hollow Road. And most of all, the bell tower, long sealed, long silenced, became a shadow people crossed the street to avoid. But then the bell rang. On January 3, 1872, exactly 21 years and 3 months after Eleanor's death, the bell tolled at precisely 3:11 a.m., the same time she was declared dead in 1851. The church was locked, rusted, and abandoned. No bell ringer, no wind, no animals, just one clean, sharp toll. The sound woke the town, and with it came a scent, salt, wet, and sharp, like brine, mold, and copper. Residents reported bloody noses and dreams of teeth turning to sand. The townspeople boarded up the tower again, sealing it with iron nails and burning sage. But 7 years later, on January 3, 1879, it rang again. This time, 3 times. That same night, Grace Delaney, age 10, vanished from her locked bedroom. No signs of entry, just salt-crusted handprints on her bedpost, and a faceless wooden doll left behind, its eye sockets filled with salt. The house was exorcised. The family fled. In 1886, it rang again. 17 times. Muffled like it came from underwater, but strong enough to rattle bones. Livestock miscarried. Townspeople bled from the nose. At the base of the tower, 3 barefoot boys stood silently in the snow. No one knew them. They never spoke, only hummed a single note in unison for 3 days. Then they died. Their throats were filled with hardened salt. The town demolished the bell tower, or so they believed. In 1893, 10 years later, traveling historians arrived expecting ruins. Instead, they found a standing black tower, narrow, windowless, built from stone not native to the area, with concentric salt rings at its base. No bell, no rope, no door. When they returned the next day, the tower was gone. In its place, a stone with Eleanor Whitlock's name carved into it, a name no one had admitted remembering. The pattern became undeniable. Every 7 years the bell tolled. Each time someone died or vanished, salt always followed, in mouths, in soil, in prints. Each toll occurred at 3:11 a.m. Even skeptics took precautions. Newborns were baptized 3 times with water, ash and seawater. Salt was banned from homes. Houses facing the cliffs placed broken mirrors in their attics, but by 1900, the town was dying. Businesses left. No new children were born. The name Dunwich Cove vanished from maps, replaced with unincorporated coastal plot, Rhode Island. Then in 1905 the final toll came, not from above but from the earth, a deep vibration, a heartbeat, beneath the town. When it ceased, a new artifact appeared at the cliff's edge, the outline of a child's body, burned into limestone with a dusting of salt inside. Too small for an adult, too long for an infant, the exact size of a 9-year-old girl. That night, the sea rose 12 feet. By morning, the last 3 families in Dunwich Cove were gone. When we speak of horror, we often imagine a monster, a silhouette in the doorway, a scream from the basement. But Eleanor Whitlock was none of those things. She was a child, and that's what makes her story so devastating. No snarling beast, no satanic rite, just a little girl, curled up on the floor of her bedroom, frozen in the moment between silence and suffering. And somehow, her blood became salt. Her name became forgotten, and the town, the only thing that should have protected her, burned her before the world could even ask why. There's something primal about this kind of fear, not the jump scare kind, but the deeper one, the one that whispers, what if innocence isn't safe? What if there are rules older than God? Eleanor's case draws us back to one of the most haunting questions in folklore, theology and science alike. Can a place be cursed, or can a person be born wrong, because of where their cradle rests? The residents of Dunwich Cove did what people always do when something terrifies them. They hid it, buried it, turned it into ritual, and then punished the very thing they didn't understand. A girl whose only crime may have been existing on soil where something ancient still breathed. In global folklore, children are often portrayed as bridges between worlds, pure, uncorrupted, and therefore open. In Irish mythology, changelings replace the real children. In Appalachian ghost stories, children sing in languages they've never learned. In Inuit legend, some are born with sea eyes, cursed to return to the ocean before adulthood. Eleanor fits the motif too well. She spoke in riddles. She made predictions. She stopped going outside after the age of 7, the same age many folkloric protections are said to expire. And she died, or changed, not by violence, but by transformation. What if she wasn't cursed? What if she was fulfilling a contract no one alive remembered signing? Salt preserves, salt protects, salt purifies. But in ancient lore, salt is also used to trap, to bind spirits, seal portals, mark the border between realms. It is not just a seasoning, it's a boundary. In Eleanor's case, the salt wasn't around her, it was inside her, and that changes everything. If her blood became salt, was it to protect her, or was it to keep something else in? What if her body became a prison, sealed not by prayer or blessing, but by mineral? What if the bell's toll wasn't a warning, but a countdown? It's easy to look at the town and call them cowards, but fear distorts truth. The people of Dunwich Cove may have truly believed that Eleanor's presence endangered them, that if her death were examined, something would be awakened, or worse, follow. And so they did what frightened community have done for centuries. They chose ritual over reason. They burned the child, they covered the grave, they forgot the name. But the world doesn't forget that easily. Energy, trauma, memory, it lingers. And some say the land remembers long after the people are gone. This isn't just a ghost story. It's the story of a girl whose memory was erased because she didn't fit the world that birthed her. Eleanor is a symbol of how fear silences the vulnerable, how difference is punished, not studied, how towns prefer legends to accountability. And perhaps most tragically, she is a child who was erased, not by time, but by design. And yet her name endures. Her bell still rings. Her salt still refuses to melt. Eleanor didn't want to hurt anyone, but they hurt her anyway. And in doing so, they taught us that the most terrifying stories are not about demons or monsters. They're about what people will do when they're afraid. Especially of a little girl with pale gray eyes, who whispered truths the sea had told. If you search Rhode Island's public health archives, you will not find a death certificate for Eleanor Whitlock. No burial registry, no coroner's note, no mention in census rolls after 1850. Legally, she vanished before she died. That, perhaps, is the greatest oddity of all. In a time when every toothache warranted a ledger entry, when baptisms were double recorded in both town and church archives, Eleanor Whitlock, a child who allegedly died under violent, unexplainable circumstances, was met with complete institutional silence. But silence can be telling. Dr. Samuel Grimm, the town physician known for his meticulous record-keeping across Kent County, showed an eerie gap in his ledgers between September 30 and October 4, 1851. The only fragment of his writing from that period was found decades later in the binding of another medical text. Specimen defies classification. Veins are not ruptured, but replaced. Texture like crystalline sediment. Signs of awareness in macular tissue post-mortem. Recommendation: destroy body immediately. No signature. Dr. Grimm never practiced again. He left a Dunwich Cove in 1852 and died in silence at a sanitarium near Boston. At St. Proculus by the sea, the church that buried over 200 souls before 1851, there is no record of Eleanor's funeral, according to a second-hand account from an unnamed sexton, later cited by historian Reverend Elbridge Marsh. The presiding priest, Father Dallin, refused to bury her, stating, "She carries no soul I can find." No bell tolled, no headstone, no rites. Father Dallin died 2 months later of wasting fever, but his recovered journal revealed his final entry: "The child is not with him. She is with what came before. Her name must not be spoken beneath the cross again." In 1852, the town council renamed Widow's Hollow Road to Seabourn Lane, and labeled the Whitlock land as unsuitable for residence. No home would ever be built there again. Publicly, the land was marked as unstable coastline, though surveys showed no geological issue. Privately, people avoided it entirely. Horses refused to pass. Children ran past it. A wound no one treated. because they all agreed not to look. And yet, modern researchers trying to study the case are met with missing pieces. The 1850-1852 medical ledgers gone, Whitlock land deed page ripped out, Eleanor's baptism record vanished, and the chapel attendance log of 1851 never recovered after the 1860 fire. What's left are fragments soaked in fear, whispers, confessions, and cryptic reflections. One of the last came from Malcolm Grieve, a historian who wrote in 1946, "Eleanor's case is not about death, it is about inversion. A child who bled salt, not sin. A town that sacrificed innocence to preserve order. And a story so strange it must be true, because no one would bother to lie so quietly for so long." In 1971, the University of Providence launched a study on cultural salt rituals and coastal New England burial practices. It was shut down within 5 months. 2 graduate students left the program. One, Alan Hurst, self-published a chapbook titled "The Child the Sea Wouldn't Keep." He described nightly dreams from October through March, of a gray-eyed girl standing at a window, waiting for the tide. He never used her name, but in his final line he wrote, "She is always looking for the window, because someone promised her she'd see the tide one last time." When all the salt has settled and the stories fade into shadows, we are left with one final image. A child alone, curled on the floor, one hand stretched toward the window. She didn't die with her eyes closed. She didn't pass in peace. Eleanor Whitlock looked for something in her final moments, something only she could see, and maybe she saw it. Maybe that's what frightened her. Or maybe it was what she had been waiting for all along. We've spent the last hour piecing together her story, her birth, her isolation, her impossible death, and the chilling aftermath that still echoes through soil and stone. But even now, with all the journals, testimonies, and fractured artifacts laid bare, we are no closer to a comfortable answer, because that's the truth of it. There is no answer, not one that fits inside a police report, not one that can be peer-reviewed, footnoted, or carbon-dated, because Eleanor was never meant to be solved. She was meant to be silenced, and still she endures. The most terrifying stories are not those that show us monsters, they're the ones that refuse to resolve. Eleanor's case doesn't end in justice. There was no trial, no culprit, no proof, only transformation, only the impossible. That's what lingers. Because in the deepest part of us, something knows. Not all hauntings scream, some whisper, some hum, some leave behind a strange powder on the windowsill, some ring bells every 7 years, some curl up on the floor and wait. There are places in this world where silence settles too easily, where doors stick even when they're unlocked, where time folds in ways no watch can track. Dunwich Cove is one of those places, and Eleanor, poor, pale, forgotten Eleanor, became the cost of our refusal to listen to what the land was trying to say. They burned her, but salt does not burn. They erased her name, but it still echoes in hymns no one remembers writing. They forgot her story, but somehow, here you are, listening to it now. Ask anyone who's been to that stretch of Rhode Island's coastline, the place once known as Dunwich Cove. They'll tell you the air tastes strange, that radios don't work right, that children cry more easily there, that the gulls don't fly overhead, and that if you walk the cliffs at night, just before the tide turns, you might hear a soft knock on the glass of an upstairs window, even though there's no house left to hold it. Eleanor doesn't haunt like a ghost. She doesn't appear in mirrors or speak through dolls. She's embedded in the salt in the wood grain, in the wind off the water. And maybe, just maybe, she was never a ghost to begin with. Maybe she was a seal. Maybe she was an offering. Maybe she was a lock, and now she's open. If you've made it this far, thank you. This channel, Buried Legends, exists because stories like Eleanor's are too important to leave forgotten. Not because they explain everything, but because they refuse to be ignored. They challenge our understanding of death, faith, place, and truth. Whether Eleanor was a victim, a vessel, or something in between, her case stands as a reminder. Some children aren't meant to be saved. Some children are here to show us the cracks in the walls we built. And some, like Eleanor, are never really gone, just waiting by the window for someone to remember. If this story stayed with you, if something about Eleanor's case echoed deeper than it should have, we invite you to stay with. Here at Buried Legends, we bring light to the stories history tried to bury, the cases sealed in silence, in salt and shadow. We cover one tale at a time, carefully, honestly, with reverence for the strange, the tragic, and the unexplainable. You can help us by subscribing, leaving a comment, or sharing this story with someone else who might understand. Let us know, have you heard a story like this before? A child whose death didn't make sense. A town that sealed its doors for reasons no one ever wrote down. We read every comment, because we're not just telling stories. We're building a record for the forgotten, for the silenced, for those who bled salt. Eleanor Whitlock died with her hand outstretched, not in fear, but in hope. And if you ever find yourself near the cliffs of Dunwich Cove, you may want to look up, because she's still at the window, and she remains.